think more carefully, and aim higher. The rankings will be remembered, but the friendships you're going to form here will last forever. You'll always talk about that time you were in Kenya, and Mushara told me not to throw my glass bottle against the wall. You had the opportunity to meet people from different countries with different languages and different backgrounds and traditions. And some may begin this week as competitors, but will leave as lifelong friends. And those friendships matter. They'll build understanding. They remind us that despite our differences, we share many of the same hopes, challenges, and aspirations. Over the coming days, I hope you'll compete with courage, prepare with discipline, speak with confidence, listen with respect, and support your teammates fully. Represent your countries with pride, but also take time to learn from one another. On behalf of Sabas and the Sabas Runda community, I wish you all an exciting, challenging, and memorable championship. May you leave this competition as stronger thinkers, better communicators, more confident leaders, and lifelong learners who will never be satisfied. Welcome again, and let your debates begin.
Another round of applause for the director of Sabas. Sabas has a fantastic community, so I really appreciate that. All right, I guess it's showtime. Tell your neighbor, it's showtime. All right, Cap.
Okay, we're gonna start with a few announcements from Cap to everyone. Then we have a couple of complaints announcements, and then we're gonna show you the draw for round one. From Cap's side, a few things we want you to remember. Obviously, today, as you know, both rounds are prepared. This means that as soon as you see the draw here, and you see the room that you're in, you need to head to your rooms straight away. No prep, no wait time, you head to your rooms straight away. Second thing, before you do that, and before the round starts, you need to give your coaches, team managers, and adults in your team all your electronic devices. This also applies to prepared rounds. Please hand your phones in, start doing that already so we don't waste time later. Before the round starts, you definitely need to be done with that.
You guys are not prepared. What are people doing? Zapping. Oh, that's so nice. So your head is working to zap. Oh. Hey, Temi. You said you are zapping. You're listening to your piano.
Welcome everyone to round one of WSDC. Looking forward to really making proceeds. I want to use the panel first. So, starting with Chanel, John, Chanel, now, less proceeds. I'm going to introduce myself and I'm going to use the phone. Hey everyone, my name is Mohammed and I'm Hi everyone, I'm Hussein Prayer. Wish you all luck if you are which I have to sit down by then. Yeah, I think that was very wonderful background to start the day off. On the topic of responsible changes, especially economic zones, let's invite the first policy speaker here.
How am I supposed to open it? Hello? Oh. Oh, it's for recording. Oh, okay. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Zihan Yang, and I'm the first speaker of Proposition, and my speech will start in 3. Oh.
If you're live streaming, would you want to put it somewhere that comes in the church people here or like somewhere here? Yeah.
Can I start? Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. So as Proposition side today, we are very proud to support Kenya's special economic zones. And first, I would like to start with some definitions for the round. So SEZs are a designated area where businesses benefit from supportive policies, mixed land uses, and also complete infrastructure, both within and outside the zone. And it may be developed both like publicly, privately, or through like partnerships. And the goal of it is to make it easier to do business and also attract both local and foreign investments. An example of these policies to attract the investments would include lower tax rates or flattened tax rates, and also easier licensing, flexible labor regulations, and also subsidized land leases. And EPZs, export processing zones, are a type of SEZs, and in this zone, the businesses can import materials and also equipment duty-free, and also manufacture the goods primarily for export. And now on to some background information of Kenya. Kenya is a lower middle income nation and also aims to be a newly industrialized economy by 2030. And it is the 3rd largest economy in Southeast Africa. And while it is a stable economy, however, it doesn't even rank in the top 10 of Africa's fastest growing economies. And we would like to note that labor is a really large issue for Kenya. And we see that statistics here show that employment growth declined from 4.4% in 2020 and 3.9% in 2024, which shows that the share of formal jobs remains very low. And here, what we mean by support, we mean 2 things. First would be we would continue investing into existing SEZs and also any plans for new ones. And also second, we would popularize them in media and also draw attention to them so that international and regional investors see them as sites to do business in. And why this is so important is because SEZs actually send a signal and they show commitment that Kenya is willing to grow continuously. Because SEZs require like initial investments to like designate the land and also develop some different types of infrastructure. So this sends a signal to both international and regional local investors that Kenya is an export-friendly nation. And this is really important because we see that many neighbors of Kenya's has already like started on working on similar like projects, and also Kenya has experienced a recent wave of political turbulence, which is which like makes it even more concerning and more urgent for us to work on SEZs. Now moving on to the arguments. My first argument is that our side deems that the special economic zones can allow a greater economic industrialization growth, and this is done through 2 mechanisms. And the 2 mechanisms are that greater foreign direct investment and also greater exports to both regional countries and international ones. And I will explore the 2 mechanisms and how they help improve the country's industrial position and how it benefits the people and states alike. So first of all, the foreign direct investments, what they look like would be like, it's the monetary investments where we are putting money into growing and also existing industry stocks. And this type of investment does not depend on tax incentives, and rather it is motivated out of the confidence of speculative growth and that the new special economic zones can provide. And these investments are good because they provide money to fund the projects, and these money can be used to purchase raw materials to build new roads and infrastructure. And also, this money can allow like more money to be placed into research and also developed with tech companies and organizations. As you can see, so SEZs, they are able to provide incentives for FDIs also because of we get lower tax, which allows for larger profit margins, and also cheaper labor, which allows the company to have like lower costs of production, and moreover, greater prospects of growth, because then a chain reaction would follow as more investment flows into the country, and this signals that Kenya is trustworthy and also stable demand inside the country. And so this type of greater demand will then allow such companies to sell more and thus profit more in the future. And the impact of this is that we will get greater industrial productivity, and foreign firms will also bring in technology and skill in the country. Because we all know that like Kenyan local workers, they are cheaper than, it is cheaper to like train them rather than paying foreign workers to transfer to Kenya. So then the Kenyan workers will be able to obtain the skills from their skilled colleagues from abroad, and because they are cheaper, so then the country will be like willing, they will have the incentive for the Kenyan workers to be trained, and then they are able to learn how to operate machinery, and yeah, they will get more skilled, and they can grow. And on top of that, infrastructure in Kenya will also be increased, because this would look like there are going to be like more roads and built in order to accommodate the growing demand for labor and workers who need to like transport across the country. And also, in order to accommodate to new buildings, the government is likely to invest in the energy industry, and also all of the like above mentioned industrial developments actually trickle down to benefit the people who live in Kenya on the grounds of greater convenience, greater efficiency, more product choice, and even cheaper products due to competition. And opposition side, they may tell you that like local business may get like outcompeted, but we tell you that this is not true, because there is this type of backward integration. And this works because an increase of industries also increases the demand for local firms and businesses. And this looks like farmers receiving more demand for food, transportation workers getting more requests for work, and also local restaurants getting more orders. So this means that by implementing SEZs, we're not going to like dominate the place. Instead, we're giving like local businesses even more opportunities. And now on to my second argument, which is, as I mentioned, Kenya has a really like big labor issue, and we believe here that SEZs are the perfect resolution to this type of Kenya's this type of issue. And according to the Federation of Kenyan Employers, youth employment ranging from ages of 15 to 35 is a staggering 67%, which is higher than the national average of 12%. And what SEZs are able to do is that they are able to produce thousands of manufacturing and service jobs, plus supporting auxiliary work in warehousing, delivering, catering, and also security. And when there are many businesses clustering in this like one zone, then more new companies can open over time. And also, SEZs will be able to generate like continuous new job openings. And then these formal job positions will slowly be able to replace the low-wage informal work with without any legal protections for millions of Kenyans, which is able to solve the status quo. And this looks like people who used to like, they might be like collecting water bottles on the street. They can be signed to a company, and they can work as cleaners where they get like protection, better working environment, and also in stable income. And what this brings is, first of all, like this ensures their safety, and second, a stable income can actually boost them to consume more in the economy, because now that they know that every month I'm going to have like this amount of money very stably, then they will be able to consume more, and then the economy has more money flowing back to it, and so thereby we create a healthier market. And third, we're also protecting the citizens in Kenya, because they get like people who like are employed in these zones, they get like better human rights, and also they can like take sick leave, and if they get injured, they're going to be like there are going to be like policies that are going to keep them safe. And opposition may tell you that SEZs are going to create like exploitive low-wage work, but what we want to say is that having a like stable formal job is always better than no job. And we also believe that Kenya's Vision 2030 also is going to expand like different types of medical coverage, and it is going to ensure that the workers are going to like be safe. So with the above, proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Honorable Chair, worthy opponents, my teammates, I greet you all. Now, today we proudly stand in opposition to the motion This House supports Kenya's special economic zones. At first glance, for our side, SEZs seem attractive. They promise jobs, investment, and industrial growth as bordered by the proposition side. However, we believe that these promises come at a cost far greater than the benefits. Development should not mean sacrifices workers' rights, government's revenue, or the future of local businesses. Before getting to my stance and my model, I'd like to define the motion and rebut some of proposition's points. Now, their framing was a little bit shallow with their definitions. So, what exactly are special economic zones? These are zones legally designated and isolated with different geographical areas where business policies are investor friendly and have specialized infrastructure mostly to bring in foreign investment. This is the part that the proposition team did not bring in, and that is the status quo in Kenya. Now, that being said, we do not challenge the definition on the EPZs as we think they are correct. Now, what is the status quo in Kenya in this aspect? Now, these foreign economic zones, so these special economic zones, as they harbor mostly foreign companies, it's a ratio of 40-60 for foreign companies taking a higher share. Now, what happens? The private-owned companies in this, the national companies in these zones can have foreign investment, like foreigners can have a share in them, but the foreigners have no right to share, to give out their shares. So the foreigners already have 100% of the company, and they can buy in shares into the private companies. These are one of the advantages that the government has given them. Simplified work permits, and you have tax holidays and so on. Now, bringing this down, I would like to rebut some of proposition's points. Now, their first mechanism was special economic zones equal greater economic ability. Now, this particular mechanism failed when the propositions did not bring in the fact that these particular special economic zones are mostly harbored by foreign companies. They made mention of the fact that it increases GDP and it helps economically and Kenya's level of economy in the world. Now, they did also mention that Kenya's economy is not around the top 10 best in the world. And now this is the problem. For the past, since 1998, Kenya has been using special economic zones and export processing zones. Now, this particular framework, they have been using over the years, and it has tended to fail, and proposition still pushes the agenda that we should continue using them, in which we oppose. They brought in the fact that it encourages infrastructure increasing in Kenya. Now, they fail to understand, again in this framing, there are 38 special economic zones in Kenya. 38 special economic zones and 47 counties. Now, only 22 counties harbor these special economic zones, leaving the rest uninhabited. If their agenda is pushing infrastructure development, are they pushing infrastructure development only in some parts of the country, which we see as wrong? Now, the second point had about employment. Now, we see this as employment illusion. Why do I say so? Now, in Kenya, again with the foreign companies, the nationals don't really tend to climb the corporate ladder. You don't see them working in offices, and they themselves brought this up by saying that the locals can work as delivery drivers, security, and do catering. Kenya has very good schools, yes, but they are not. The nationals are not as employed in these particular zones, in these particular companies in these zones, as much as the foreign individuals coming with their own company. That's the first thing. Secondly, they work these particular low-paying jobs at extensive hours. Now, we also see that with this level of employment, now, the government already gives these particular companies tax holidays. The tax holidays helps more of the company, not the company's workers. And now, the burden already of the tax is on the citizens. That is the status quo in Kenya. Now, these particular workers working long wage jobs in these companies tend to lose more. Also, in this same Kenya, we have situations where these EPCs, okay, now, moving into how we would frame this debate and our model and all. Now, We prefer, or we want a world where Kenya will invest more in small and medium-sized enterprises, infrastructure, regional development. We want a world where, yes, Kenya will invest more on its national benefits than the special economic zones in their method for international recognition in 2030. Now, how will this be met? Now, how is this alternative better? It is seen as long-term, yes, because rather than special economic zones, as my second speaker will come up to say, they are short-term. They are short-term in the sense that when they find better tax rates elsewhere, they tend to leave the country and settle somewhere else. This can be seen as evident in the case of Big Pharma. Big Pharma left Kenya 2019 and left Tanzania because Tanzania offered better tax rates on imports and exports. Now, if a national company is aimed at leaving Kenya in expansion, Kenya becomes the base. This is the base of their business. With these special economic zones mostly harboring foreign individuals or foreign companies, we see that if these particular companies want expansion and better rates for their businesses and whatnot, you will see that they tend to leave Kenya, as in the case of Big Pharma, which I earlier mentioned. Now, moving on to my first substantial argument, the development idea is narrow. Now, what am I saying? Now, again, we have counties like Nairobi City, Mombasa County, and Kiambu County that harbor many of these particular zones, like the Mombasa harboring 26 economic zones, Kilifi harboring 90 economic zones. Now, all this happens in basically the northern part of the country. Now, we do see that for the rest of the country, like in the Samburu, the Garissa, and the Mandara County, they are very underdeveloped. Now, we are pushing the agenda for equal development, and our model has that if governments does operate in these small and medium-sized enterprises that are large spread throughout the country, we do achieve the agenda of equal development, not in the actual case of it as it is today. Now, we do see that since the government tends to invest more in these foreign special economic zones, in this particular southern part of the country, sorry. Now we do see that the Mombasa County, the Garissa County, and the rest, they receive lower investments, lower infrastructural bills, and this is the exact reason why we see that Kenya's economy is not progressing. Our world has it that if Kenya wishes to attain this particular international recognition that they aim for in 2030, it should be because of their actual developments by their nationals, not by a short-term model the proposition is giving us by investing more in special economic zones, which are mostly harbored by foreign individuals. And for all these reasons, we beg to propose. We beg to oppose, and I expect my second speaker to expatiate more on the points I've just said. Thank you.
Side opposition pushes to the agenda that somehow the Kenyan government will have enough resources to invest in many small and medium-sized enterprises in Kenya to achieve equal development throughout. We believe this is not realistic, and we believe that special economic zones is the most economically viable option for Kenya at the moment. And in my speech, I'll extend on how even though there might be some inequalities in development at the present, we believe that in the long term, there can be the development of auxiliary industries as well as transferable skills that can help long-term economic growth. So first, a few rebuttals. Side opposition firstly states that SCZs and EPZs have caused a negative effect to the Kenyan country because since their introduction in 1998, there has been like a lot of corruption and unemployment, and there hasn't been a really good economic effect. We believe this is not the main factor because right now there's only 38 SCZs in Kenya, and they generate about 0.5 of Kenyan GDP. So we believe this is not a significant factor to cause like an entire like country's bad economic situation. However, we believe the most important factor is like a lot of like the corruption and inner bureaucracy of the Kenyan economy. So Kenya loses roughly 5% of their GDP annually, and this is according to the African Development Bank. And we believe that the money lost from SCZs, like the tax revenue, there's only 10% corporate tax compared to 30%, which side opposition would argue is like better for the like government spending. We believe this is smaller and insignificant compared to the billions of dollars lost in the Kenyan economy due to these bribes and inefficiency. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, you made mention of the fact that this special economic zone just go like 0.5% of the GDP in Kenya. So what particular economic aspect takes you of the rest of the greater margin of this particular economic system?
Oh, okay. So about the economic system, Kenyan economy is actually made up of like a majority of small and medium scale enterprises, and we believe that these should not be the focus of Kenyan investment because firstly, they already make up a majority of the Kenyan economy. Individuals from Kenya have an incentive to open up their like food truck or their small business because they can earn profit and pay like rents for their family. So we believe this is not something that the government has to actively encourage. There is an incentive embedded in itself already. Secondly, we believe this is not viable for the long-term development in the Kenyan economy. So by small and medium-scale enterprises, they don't really have the technological development, the large-scale infrastructure development, the manufacturing skills that need to be developed for like large-scale manufacturing or more technological development to push Kenya out of like the 60% agricultural and primary sector economy to make it a more advanced economy. And thirdly is that if these like small and medium scale enterprises are invested in, these are extremely local and distributed like disparsely. So what this means is that there's going to be a lot of complex bureaucracy to decide like where these funds are allocated to and to which businesses to allocate these. And this, because Kenya is already like filled with some corruption, it's like 130 out of 180 countries in the corruption index. Yeah. We believe this has more potential for corruption and bribery. So we believe this is not a valuable investment. So why are SEZs the best option for Kenya right now, and why do we support SEZs? So throughout its introduction, SEZs have generated 7,000 direct jobs already, and we believe that SEZs, while they do produce regional inequality, we believe that solving some unemployment is better than like not much unemployment being solved on their side at all. This is because even though like SEZs might have like low wage work and the jobs generated in SEZs initially might be like delivery drivers, transportation like drivers, and like the lower scale jobs, we believe that the direct comparison to this is a lot of jobs in the informal economy, or like not being employed at all and having no money to feed your family or to have sustenance themselves. So a stable factory job, even with flaws and even with some like long hours, at least means families can afford food, rent, and school fees. And this is better than like not being employed at all. So we believe that like SEZs are quite economically efficient because when you invest in SEZs, the government actually does not have to put in a lot of direct government spending. A lot of it is directed by the foreign firms themselves, and this is exactly why we need foreign investment. It's because the Kenyan like local business people or the Kenyan government does not have that much money to generate large-scale infrastructure things or like technological projects. But the reason that foreign firms will want to do these like infrastructure spending and want to put these technological investments is because Kenyan government offers tax benefits and offers reductions on capital for like the first 5 years. So it is precisely the positive tax benefits from the SEZs that are able to attract these foreign direct firms. There's already a lot of competition from countries like Tanzania, Ethiopia, and other countries in the EAC. So in order to make Kenya stand out, we have to introduce these SEZs to attract these foreign direct investments. And why is this FDI extremely important? It's because we believe in the long term there can be a lot of transferable skills brought to local workers. This is because to have operational efficiency, having suppliers within or in adjacent to the SEZ eliminates the need for long-term distance transport, which reduces the loading times and it mitigates supply chain disruption. So we believe that foreign firms also have an incentive to support auxiliary industries in the local area, which generates some scale of local employment. So we believe there's an economic multiplier effect. So these support sectors can help anchor the primary companies to the region, which creates localized employment. Yeah, sure.
Please can you give an example of foreign companies giving actual incentives to the local?
We're not saying they're giving incentives to their locals. We're saying the government has to give tax benefits incentives for the FDIs to come, and the FDIs will generate jobs for the local people as well as the surrounding auxiliary industries. So we believe that foreign firms have an incentive to support these auxiliary industries because of these lower costs transport, and also with these locals, Kenyan locals employed in these foreign firms, slowly but gradually they can learn some transferable skills, such as how to manufacture something or how to manage a computer system and manage AI system as well as interacting with global customers. And we believe this will make Kenyan workers more skilled in the future, which can have incentives for companies to just move to Kenya without the need for SEZs. But we believe right now SEZs are the most viable and economically sustainable method for the Kenyan government to at least attract some jobs and in the future perhaps create auxiliary industries and have a more even distribution.
Okay, so beginning my speech in investors and spending too much on SEZs at expense of the wider economy. SEZs are not development, they are desperation. Instead of fixing roads, power and corruption for all 47 counties, the government is instead building 5 gated estates for foreign companies. The cost of 20 billion Kenyan shillings in lost taxes. They displace farmers in Dogonkundu. They give us cultural jobs with no future. Redevelopment is not enclaved. Redevelopment is dignity for every Kenyan in every town. Now, special economic zones create the appearance of development, but fail to build a strong, self-reliant Kenyan economy. Now, moving on, before I begin my arguments, I'd like to rebut some things that the proposition said. Proposition said that SEZ allows greater economic growth. Now, here is a question I have here for proposition. What will happen if these SEZs leave Kenya and go to another country with better services? Proposition claims that SEZs allow greater economic control, but these SEZs are the same people that don't treat workers well, and the workers that are being treated well are either the foreigners or people with connection. Proposition also claims that SEZs are the solution to Kenyan labor, but then these SEZs are the same people that don't give safe working conditions to their workers. Proposition says they solve labor problem. Here's a clear example. In Artist River Special Economic Zones, the workers complain of unsafe conditions and low payment. So I hope proposition will be able to clarify that point. Now, moving on to my first argument. Just like my first speaker said, physical trap. SEZs create short-term economic gains but do not produce sustainable national development. The mechanism here is that the government gives tax breaks, cheap land, and other incentives to attract investors. Companies stay as long as their benefits make Kenya more profitable. Once these incentives expire or another country offers a better deal, they can relocate. Now what happens to Kenya? Jobs disappear when companies leave. So when these special economic zones actually leave Kenya, jobs are actually gone because these special economic zones that give jobs. So, and also local communities become dependent on a few large employers. Those medium enterprises, the community that is going to rely on them for jobs, which is many are going to remain jobless. Kenya is left with unsafe with unused structures and infrastructures. Those special economic zones that were actually built for these these SEZs are actually left unused because these SEZs did not pass down their skills for others to use it. So the buildings and infrastructure are just left unused. The economy becomes unstable because growth depends on foreign companies rather than domestic industries. So now the economy is like we don't have jobs because these SECs are actually providing jobs. So now when you go, there's no job again. Like people that actually have jobs, the whole community is in chaos. For example, Kenya's EPZ attracted many foreign garments manufacturers because of tax incentives and preferential access to foreign markets. However, when demand fell or production became cheaper elsewhere, some factories reduced operation or closed, leading to job losses. The impact here was that Kenya experienced temporary growth instead of lasting industry development. Now, we see that in our own policy, we see that invest directly in Kenya businesses and industry across the country because it's better because Kenya businesses are less likely to relocate abroad and profits stay within Kenya. We would rather build businesses that belong to Kenyans than depend on companies that can leave whenever another country offers a better deal. Now, moving on to my second argument, foreign dependency instead of Kenya ownership. The claim is that special economic zones make Kenya dependent on foreign investors instead of strengthening Kenya businesses. The mechanism is that most firms operating in special economic zones are multinational corporations with greater capital and technology than local businesses Now, the analysis says that many profits are sent back to the company's home country instead of being reinvested in Kenya. So when these companies actually make a lot of income, they usually send it back to their home country to spend it. And even if that's investing, invest just a very little amount, like I say, to estimate, they can say they invest just 5% out of the 100% of what they have made. Local entrepreneurs struggle to compete because they don't receive the same advantages. So these special economic zones are giving advantages like tax holidays, low taxes, and so on. So now these local entrepreneurs are actually struggling to compete with them because these local entrepreneurs are not actually giving the same advantages as these special economic zones. Kenya loses the opportunity to build strong locally owned industries that keep wealth within the country. Now, Kenya loses the ability to actually build local industries because these special economic zones, like the government are going to focus on these special economic zones. So all the advantages go to them, everything goes to them, and these local entrepreneurs are actually struggling to deal with their high taxes and try to compete with these special economic zones. My evidence says that many large investments in Kenya are foreign owned, while they create jobs, ownership, and a significant share of profit remain outside Kenya. The impact here is that a more competitive economy with higher productivity. Our own policy is better because local entrepreneurs create wealth that remains in Kenya. Domestic firms become more competitive over time. We see that give tax relief, affordable loans, grants, and technical support to Kenya-owned small enterprises and manufacturers. Now, redevelopment is when Kenya owns the engines of economic growth, not when foreign companies temporarily rent space in our economy. Moving on to my third argument. Instead of misallocating government resources, invest in public goods. The mechanism here is that businesses in SEZs produce goods for export, increasing Kenya's foreign exchange earnings. Analysis here are these more exports strengthen the Kenyan shilling and reduce dependence on imports. What I'm trying to say here is that instead of the government actually be focusing on special economic zones, the billions that we have actually used to build these special economic zones, we can actually use it to fund schools, fund hospitals, build hospitals for the benefit of the community and not just special economic zones. Although tax incentives reduce revenue initially, increase employment, business growth, and export expands the tax base. So now when these special economic zones expand the tax rate in the long run. So when this government actually invests in special economic zones, the impact is more longer than when these special economic zones are here because we have no certainty or no anything that special economic zones are going to live at any time they want. My evidence says that if the government spends billions building infrastructure for one SEZ, while many public schools and hospitals remain underfunded, public resources are benefiting are benefiting a limited number of businesses instead of the wider population. Public money should improve the whole economy, not just selected investment zones. The impact is that public money serves a small group of investors rather than improving economic opportunities for the majority of Kenyans. Now, yes, our own policy according to this point. We use the same money to improve infrastructures and services for everyone. For example, affordable credit for small enterprises, better internet access, reliable electricity nationwide. Our policy is better because every business benefits not just inside the special economic zones. Economic growth becomes more inclusive. Now, instead of creating islands of development, we should improve the entire economy. Overall, special economic zones do not build a strong Kenyan economy. They create temporary growth, increase independence of foreign corporations, and divert public resources away from broader national development. This means the cost outweighs the benefit. We as opposition have told you why our policy is better. With this, we are proud to oppose. Thank you.
Please give me 20 seconds to organize the notes. Thank you. Right. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, hello judges. I myself come from a paradigm example of a successful SDZ country. So, it pains me a lot to see how much opposition discredits the given benefits of SCEs, right, has brought to the country of Kenya. They have feed you delusion. They give you fear. Tell you that it's going to take away it's going to take away all the benefits. It's going to incur utter destruction to the Kenyan society and whatever they said. The thing is, have China and other successful SDZ countries not had listened to their claims, their endangerments, their worries, we will not be where we are right now. We will not come this far as a powerful economic superpower, right? So, primarily thing I want to argue as my extension speech is that there's a lot of benefits SDEs provide that they cannot claim with their so-called alternative, correct? And the second one of this is that the potential, there's so much potential in the long-term run to become one thing that other countries haven't been in the past. So basically, within my speech, I'll do 2 things. First of all, I'll provide rebuttals to the 3 core arguments they have provided. Then I'll move on to weigh in the end why, based on a short-term and long-term analysis, why we still provide more benefits and why they do not have the capacity to bring in the goods they claim to have. So first of all, they tell you that the first argument coming from speaker 1 is that they tell you that it's going to be more costly. There's going to be less benefits, right? And that even the benefits is not going to help the citizens, correct? And one core thing is that they tell you that the workers are not going to benefit from these foreign direct companies because the policies are not for the workers but for the foreign direct companies. So I think one thing they have to realize is that companies and workers are not like 2 different parties, right? They have mutual interests. What do companies want? They want profit, correct? And how do they get profit? From selling their goods, and good goods, correct? Quality goods. And they want to sell as much as possible. And where do they get these, who creates these products? The people, the citizens of Kenya, correct? They want to, so this leads to 3 things. First of all, they have the incentive to train these workers in order to increase productivity. That's one thing. Second of all, they also have the interest to not give them such a bad working condition, because that would obviously not be that good, correct? There has to be a comparative for Kenyan workers to want to work in most international firms in the first place. And number three, I think another thing is that what my second speaker and my first speaker has mentioned is that there's always a comparative to what these multinational companies can provide that they cannot provide. Without these multinational companies, if you're working in informal industries, you access even worse stuff. There's no safety, there's no consistent pay, there's no workers' rights, and there's also like even worse environments. I do not see the case why just having policies for these multinational companies would not be good for the citizens, right? And because there's not much time there. Anyways, and then the second speaker also provides the second speaker extends on the first speaker's argument of how it's a short-term problem. Well, the case for us is short-term. So I'd like to flip this. Is that I don't see why is it really short-term. Because first of all, they try to rebut our case. One second. They try to rebut our case by saying that these multinational companies are going to leave after 10 years, after these tax exemptions fades out, right? First of all, I tell you it's not likely to happen because there's an opportunity cost of leaving. Let's say you're a very established company, and after 10 years of, I'm not taking it now, after 10 years of tax benefits, after 10 years of tax benefits and it's gone, will you really leave? First of all, no. Why? First of all, you're an established company. You have plenty of workers here. You're not going to simply just tell them and you fire them and go to another country, right? There's established plants, there's sunken costs that you cannot ignore, correct? And second of all, there's also a synergy and there's a developed regional bond within the companies. Because in order to stay there for 10 years, there's definitely some reason to be there. There must be efficiency already, right? And even after 10 years without tax exemptions, they're still not going to leave likely because of two reasons. First of all, there's going to be reallocation costs. It is unlikely that just because another country can offer like 10% lower wages, that I'll just go there, right? That's just implausible. And second of all, there's too much uncertainty. If I've already stayed here for 10 years, why do I want to try something new? Why do I want to risk another country with uncertain prospects and go there, right? So for all those reasons, I believe that the core arguments they talk is just unclear. And now let's do some weighing. They kept on talking about short-term, long-term benefits, of how our side is just very short-term. First of all, I disagree about why it's short-term. We tell you that we're going to be investing in these newly advanced technological companies, basically these multinational companies who bring in stuff that are probably new to the place. They have technologies, they have better expertise, they have better knowledge, right? These knowledge is like raising the bar. And by raising the bar, you have much more potential. So what is an opposition? Opposition promotes an idea of limited growth. There's no more, like at most they can just provide more industries, but these industries are obviously cannot compete or cannot be the same as these already established multinational companies, right? So basically, in the long term, what we can provide is more industries, more advanced industries, and we can also resolve the clinical unemployment problem through newly created demand, right? And what is opposition? Let's just take the worst case, best case scenario. They tell you that our stuff is going to cost a lot. But what is the worst thing that could result from this? Debt, right? Like a budget debt, right? Well, how bad is that? Let me ask you. You're saying that just because tax exemption is going to help us lose money, we should not do it. So first of all, I tell you two things. First, the only bad thing that can lead to it is a very long-term debt that constantly drains the country out of money. We tell you that's not true. Because first of all, as more multinational companies come into this country, there's going to be more citizens with more skill. They're going to work more. There's going to be more products to purchase, and there's a cyclical effect where more citizens become rich, and there's going to be more income tax that you get from these richer citizens, right? And as more companies come into the country, there's still going to be new products flowing into the domestic market. And mind you, value-added tax on these products still exists. It's not like there's no source of funding at all, right? So let's just provide another comparative, right? What is true? Why is it untrue that everything that we bring you in proposition side cannot be brought to you by opposition side? So first of all, skill. Well, how can you develop these new skills without foreign direct investment, right? And why is foreign direct investment not possible or like less possible? We tell you that first of all, SEZ is one of the most attractive policies already. Unless you can provide a similar amount of tax exemptions and benefits, I do not see why foreign investment will provide the equal amount of quality and quantity companies into the country, right? So just lack of funding, first of all. And second of all, you're also unlikely to have enough funding in the first place. All these infrastructure developments, you're facing a very constrained, very corrupt government, right? No offense, but like But basically, you're facing, number one, corruption. You're also facing the lack of funds. We on our side solve corruption because we do not have the government do not have the incentive to be corrupt anymore. Because the foreign companies, they act as checks and balances to force the company, or at least lobby against the government from being corrupt. Because why would they come to a corrupt country? Like, why do they want to be in a corrupt country, right? And second of all, there's a problem in funding. Because in our side, at least we have foreign direct investments, which will give us money to build on these infrastructures, build on these companies that can help develop, let's say, a tech and finance industry in the future, right? This is not true in the opposition side. They lack both the money to do these projects in their alternative, and second of all, they also lack a skill to do so. So for the final 10 seconds, I want to conclude is that whatever proposition provides, first of all, whatever opposition provides, we have rebutted it on the grounds that it's not that bad as it seems. Companies aren't going to just escape away, and that's the only foundation they built upon. So with all these reasons, I believe it's a core win. It's a very obvious win for proposition. I'm very proud to propose. Thank you.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. A side proposition can prove to us that the amount of revenue that the government wastes to fix its designated area, that is special economic zones, to attract these investors is less than the incentives that these investors offer to citizens, then who buy to their case. Do you prefer low jobs or no jobs at all? This is side proposition's core value, right? But now, this is the same thing that happened years ago. This is the same thing that happened in ancient times, okay? Now, the white people came into our economy and bribed our forefathers, enslaved us, and gave them few pieces of silver and said they were going to invest in our economy and all of that. But now, when they left, Africa becomes developed, but they go back to ground zero. We see that Africa did not get developed in any way; rather, it went back to its first ground. Now, this if we are supporting Kenya's special economic zones, then we are going back to ancient times. Okay, now. Our model is this. The main problem of today's debate is, and the central question of today's debate is, do Kenya's special economic zones create genuine broad-based national development, or do they concentrate benefits among a few while imposing significant costs on the rest of the country? The main problem of today's debate is which alternative will actually drive Kenya to development, okay? Now, so a proposition comes to talk about investment. So proposition asks us to believe that once investors come in, development naturally follows, okay? But investment is only an input, not the outcome. Panel, attracting investors is not Kenya's real problem. Kenya's real problem is that investment not translating into development, okay? We realize that these foreign investors are temporal. Once their incentives are over, they find better places with more better incentives. With more better incentives offered, they tend to leave everything, leaving nothing behind. Accepted?
We already said it's long-term contracts, so why would they leave if they can stay at least 15 years? And also there's some cost.
Okay, now, what are special economic zones? Special economic zones are a designated area in an economy, right, where the government actually produces incentives such as tax breaks, tax holidays, okay, just to attract foreign investors, right? So now these investors come into this economy just because of these tax breaks, because they tend to pay lower taxes than the rest of the economy, right? Now, when this offer is over, they tend to leave the economy. Take for example, big farmers that was found in Kenya, right? When they found out that Tanzania offered them better incentives, they left Kenya, leaving nothing behind, leaving not even their skills behind. Now, Cyproposha is going to come here and tell us how rejected. Cyproposha is going to come here and tell us how they train the local citizens and all of that. But have you ever entered a factory, right, and seen like a local working in managerial post? You only see them doing the manual labor work, right? Now, when these foreign investors tend to leave the economy, right, what then happens to the local citizens of the country? They leave them with no capital and no skills. Rejected. Now, so proposition wants us to celebrate because investors are happy. We want Kenya to be better off. Investment is not the goal, but development is the goal. Now, panel, would you prefer 100 billion Kenya shillings 100 billion Kenya shillings in investment that creates only a few jobs? Or would you prefer 30 billion Kenya shillings in investment that creates thousands of jobs, supports Kenya's businesses, transfers technology, and develops multiple countries? Obviously, we prefer the second option, right? This brings it to the reality that the quality of investment matters more than the quantity. Investment is only a tool. Development is the destination. If the tool is not reaching the destination, then the tool is not solving the problem, right? We have already seen that Kenya's main problem is development, right? Now, our side brings it to the table that we do not want Kenya to support special economic zones. As Cyprus position will say, Kenya's special economic zones hold 0.5% of gross domestic product, right? Now, what happens to the remaining percent is I've already seen in statistics that 80% of Kenya's profit comes from local businesses, and just 20% comes from the special economic zones, right? Now, why don't you think that the government actually tends to stop investing in these special economic zones and tends to help these local businesses? Now, first, special economic zones can produce jobs, as I proposition say. Now, they tend to forget that these jobs are temporary. Once the incentives are over, they tend to leave the economy, leaving the economy back to ground zero, right? Now, if the government tends to support these local businesses, they are their citizens, they'll never leave the economy. At first sight, it might not seem very advantageous, but we see that if the government continues supporting rejected, if the government continues supporting these local businesses, they tend to grow. If they actually if they could arrange the market from the less privileged, arrange the roads from the less privileged market to the main market, we're actually going to see that because there are many business people in the local areas, but now they cannot invest in their products because they do not have good products that takes them to the main market. So if the government actually invest in these local business people, local farmers that are in the rural areas, create good products that leads to the main market, we're actually going to see that Kenya's real problem is being solved. That is, investment is being the investment that the government is going to invest on these local farmers is actually going to lead to transformation. Actually going to lead to develop Kenya. That is Kenya's that's Kenya's real problem of today. Now, this debate rests on two crashes, right? That is investment. Proposition says investment. We win because investment without complete ownership creates dependency. Now, Cyprus position only talks about investment. They do not tell us how these foreign investors invest in our economy, actually lead the economy with the investment, right? That is why we win. Now, Cyprus position says special economic zones provide jobs. We win because jobs without progression do not give transformation. Now, they say they provide jobs. These jobs, and immediately their incentives are over, right? Now, we choose an alternative where the government can support their own local businesses, right? These are permanent methods of investment, permanent methods of transformation, right? We win because our proposition fails to show us how special economic zones benefit most Kenyans. We win because our proposition fails to show us that tax losses are outweighed by public gains. We win because our proposition fails to show us how local businesses are outweighed by public gains. We win because our proposition fails to show us how development outside these zones also improves development, right? Now we win because our side proves to you that having the government investing on local businesses actually drives development. This impacts the citizens, the whole citizens at large, because statistics have already proven that special economic zones hold just 20% of Kenya's economy, while local businesses hold 80%, right? Now, the government tends to invest on these local businesses. Does the government invest on 80% of its economy, right? We're actually going to see that this actually solves the main problem of Kenya, rather than focusing on the special economic zones, which actually short-term, as I proved in my speech, saying that when the incentives are over, they tend to leave the economy. Now, with all this said, yeah?
How do you think this, when it's looked at the target is where it's double 80%, is worth it? How do you maximize this result?
Okay, now just in summary, right? The amount of money that the government tries to invest on this special economic zone, because have in mind that the government actually tries to fix its designated area to attract investors, right? If the government tries to use this money that is fix its designated area and invest on local businesses, right? We see that the government actually encourages these local businesses to do more, to work more. They tend to develop the economy more, right? Now, with all of this said, we are proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, Honorable Chair, opponents, friends, I greet you all. Now, the proposition side lost this debate when they failed to understand how exactly the government initially spends to create these particular economic zones. Now, for clarity, in Nairobi City, for example, that hosts a total of 12 economic zones, we do see that for the roads to be built, yes, China built most of the roads here. How did the government get them to build these roads? It was a loan taken out. Has the government paid back those loans? No, that's the first thing. These actual zones are actually built by the government, funded by CESA, the actual organization put in place to regulate these particular things. So they brought up the point of too much bureaucracy in our case, but they have actual organizations funding, actual national organizations funding these particular SECs and actually improving more bureaucracy. Now, I also mentioned the fact on skill learning that when these companies do leave, if at all they are leaving, they leave behind skills. They leave behind skills, they don't leave behind capital. If a car assembly company is to leave, who comes now to fund that particular company? Firstly. Secondly, the zone initially built for the car assembly company was not the company itself. They don't pay as much as it would be to set up in the first place. The government does this for them as a way to invest in the country. That is the status quo in Kenya. They came up and said, coming from a country with special economic zones and its benefits. Now, special economic zones and its benefits in other countries is not the case in Kenya. And how do we see this? Yes, in their judging from the both debates and weighing, we will see that when we brought up the fact of the tax burden being mostly on the citizens as they give tax breaks, tax holidays, and the rest, they said there's value added tax. Now, for example, I as a foreigner, if I buy goods, for example, buy things from the supermarket, when I get to the airport, I can give my passport and get the tax back because I'm not a citizen. How does this help Kenya, for example? Also, you cannot compare value-added tax to income tax, export tax, and import tax. These are all holidays that these particular companies in these zones already have. Also, when you talk about long-term and short-term development, our side is long-term because, one, firstly, since 1998, before the past framework of the EPZs, Kenya has been in this economic system of the special economic zones. Now, from our analysis, in which we do not have to bring in, your side already told us that these particular zones just hold 0.5 of the GDP. Where does the rest go to? The small enterprise businesses, the nationwide businesses. Now, you also told us that more employment comes from the nationwide businesses and the small enterprise businesses. So why exactly? They don't really tell us why. If more employment comes from here, more of the country's economy is based on national growth in that particular aspect. How does that help that? In our point about development inequality, they were ready to take a trade-off, but did not give us actually what the trade-off is. It's not engaged fully on that point on how it is better to have short-term investments, low-paying jobs in these particular zones, and actual development in the rest of the country. In the rest of the counties, we even gave examples of how there are less. We gave examples of how there are less. More counties without economic zones, without special economic zones and export processing zones, rather than the rest of the countries who actually have them. And this particular problem, this particular concentration, as my second speaker said, where she made mention of the fact that when there is in fact concentration of these particular zones in an urban center, it causes immigration. How is immigration bad? We see that here there is inflation because of like the number of prices of houses going up. Also, and other aspects of it being that these particular zones are congested, and since marginalized communities are leaving to get into these zones, this leaves the marginalized communities actually unattended to. And for all these reasons, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
Small and medium enterprises do make up the majority of the economy, yet unemployment is 12% and youth unemployment is higher than 40%. have a sustainable Kenyan economy where people are employed and the employment rate is closer to the desirable 4%. So this is a simple proposition when there are three main issues in debate. The first one is the long or short-termism. So the side opposition says that SECs are short-term and firm only stays as long as the benefits exist. First, we tell you this is not true because, as the first speaker said, there's long-term contracts which are often 50 or 10 years. So this means that there at least will be a sustainable period of economic output. And secondly, is that there's a huge amount of sunk cost by foreign firms. So this looks like infrastructure invested in already. This looks like staff in these positions. This looks like new headquarters being established. And thirdly, is that these SECs also become more profitable in the long run because they have more connections with local auxiliary firms. They develop more productive local extraction methods of resources or manufacturing goods, for example. So because they're more profitable, there's less incentive to leave as they become more familiar with the African economy and with the local SEC environment. But secondly, even if this is true, firstly, capital can be reused. This looks like opportunities for national businesses because now the roads have already been built. There's lower barriers to entry. The infrastructure already exists. So workers can use the skills they already learned to develop national industries or have some national output. So we believe that the roads being built is a great opportunity for future development, even if the SECs leave in the worst possible scenario. But secondly, at least some Kenyans are lifted out of employment for a period of time. This looks like they can save some money to raise their families, and there's at least a period of jobs and benefits they can enjoy as opposed to none. And secondly, is the issue about the cost of SECs and the local versus foreigners clash. So we believe that yes, SECs are foreign, and there are more foreign workers than local workers in some SECs, but at least there is some local jobs being generated. So why is the SME model not valid? Is that firstly, there are limited Kenya funds, as my speakers have talked about, and secondly, that Kenyan local small businesses simply do not have the technological capacity of multinational companies to produce internationally productive exports and to produce really high quality goods for lower prices to help the local people as well. So even if some revenue goes to foreign sources, there's also going to be a profit incentive to continue investing in the Kenyan economy. So why is the small medium-scale enterprises argument not valid? Is that firstly, this is not conflict. We can still support SMEs. The motion is simply that if we support special economic zones or not. So special economic zones are not the astronomical cost that opposition pushes because it's mostly just tax exemption. The government is not actively spending huge amounts of money. Yes, the government might build roads, but roads are essential for the whole economy. Not only can they be used for foreign firms, but they can also be used for local firms in the future, even if these SECs leave. So we believe that building roads is not really a valid argument here. But secondly, there's an intrinsic motivation for the small scale enterprises because of market forces and they want to feed their own families and things like that. And for worker treatment, we actually believe there's more checks and balances in multinational companies than local small scale enterprises. Because this appears firstly, they're likely to have more international attention with business needs and products around the world. And secondly, there's international exports, so they need to meet export regulations. Thus, they need to be established labor laws. And thirdly, that there's a larger scale. They make up a larger percentage of the GDP, so there's more government attention to how they treat their workers. Therefore, we believe this is a clear proposition.
All right, thank you so much for the time. Thank you everyone for watching the round. I will have another break for 25 minutes. You may also shake hands and also meet as well, and we'll go back. Thank you everyone for what was a very much fun today. We're especially happy that you've done this round and more to come. Let's go into the decision. So it was a unanimous decision. I think myself and Alice as well as trainees. We gave the basic side of that position. Congratulations to the opposition. Commiserations to the opposition. Okay, there are two issues to discuss within this OA. The first one is to discuss whether or not evidence does like, whether or not SEZs are a viable economic model. I think the first thing that we discussed in this issue, coming from the proposition, is the idea that absent of SEZs, it is unlikely that Kenya is able to attract significant amounts of foreign direct investment and foreign companies investing within the country specifically because of things like regional competition, likely also seem kind of less valuable and less attractive tax rates that you're not able to offer to foreign companies from the get-go. So I do think what the proposition was able to exclusively claim is the idea that foreign companies are likely only going to come as a result of SEZs. The bigger question in this debate is whether or not foreign companies are forced for good or evil when it comes to the economic development of Kenya specifically. And I think for this comparison to be clear, I think opposition provided a counterfactual to likely what Kenya is likely going to fund as a result, if not for SEZs specifically. So I think that there is value in opposition mentioning the idea that you're probably going to fund small, medium enterprises and small businesses. I would say that because this is a value debate rather than a policy one, and we give more explanation to explain why it's the likely diversion of resources could probably be helpful. But I do think that this was a credited counterfactual that the panel was also able to agree on, which is the idea that if you don't fund SEZs, you're probably going to fund things like small, medium enterprises. The question to this is whether or not this is valuable to the economy of Kenya specifically. I think there are two contentions that the proposition gave to us that we can also agree on. The first is in terms of whether or not this is the economic necessity for Kenya specifically. I do think that both sides agree that the small, medium enterprises and the informal economy probably makes up a large portion of Kenya's economy right now. But I think the proposition explains the imperative that the necessity for Kenya is to be able to establish large manufacturing hubs, large tech firms and companies, specifically aimed towards hiring more workers or probably cross-national companies rather than small and medium enterprises that focus on things like service economies that already exist right now. The second convention that we also agree on is the idea that it is true that the economy right now is largely driven as a result of the informal economy. Then there's also less of a necessity for the government to fund it specifically, but also at the same time it is inexclusive in that it Trump's explanation to why SEZs are also economically valuable is that they also create extensions of auxiliary industries, which means that when they create SEZs and create large factories and companies, there are also abilities for small and medium enterprises to set up shops like food vendors or service economies in those places as well. So the conclusion to the counterfactual that was provided to us by the opposition was that I think the first step Trump explains is not the most important thing that Kenya should prioritize, but the second is that it is not an exclusive prioritization of how Kenya can develop its small and medium enterprises. But I think I was able to take the opposition case at its best, which is the idea that the investment of small medium enterprises can also create things like large manufacturing, like the examples of global entrepreneurs that the opposition was able to give to us within the round. The question therefore is what is unique and what is not unique to the development of the Kenyan economy through domestic economies rather than foreign companies. But the panel agreed that was inexclusive in the round is twofold. The first in terms of lost income and taxes. Because I think the first thing that we got from the opposition was that with the development of SEZs, it means that you probably lose out on taxes and lose out on income that could have gone to government revenue that funds and other things. But I do think that this falls out of the debate insofar as opposition's explanation also in terms of how we boost up domestic consumption and production is also through things like subsidies and the provision of tax exemptions to local companies and local entrepreneurs in the first place. Which means that both sides probably would indicate a loss of government revenue and income, regardless of who you fund specifically. So the factor of cost to the Kenyan government is a less important issue for the panel than the round. The second issue that we thought that was inexclusive was in the idea of nationwide development. Because I think the key contention that we had when we won the opposition case was that the problem with SEZs is that they are only focused in large regional and urban hubs like Nairobi and Mombasa. The issue is that other parts, including the south of Kenya, does not receive as much development opportunities. The question we have had is whether or not the diversion of funds to SMEs in counterfactual is a form of equitable form of development. I think probably those are reasons as to why most SMEs are probably also concentrated in urban areas, but also at the same time, with large amounts of bureaucracy and corruption, it's likely that funds will equally be diverted to large regional hubs rather than rural areas that we see in Kenya right now. So even if it's true that there's economic inequality, the counterfactual that the opposition to engage was also an insolvable one towards resolving that regional inequality within Kenya specifically. There are two impacts that I think the panel was able to credit as distinct as a result of this difference. The first is in terms of the unique value that foreign companies and FDI does provide to Kenya specifically that we get from the proposition. So here's the things in terms of, firstly, the foreign industry is more economically efficient, they produce far better, they have far more technical expertise, which means that these are also skills and these are also economic gaps that the Kenyan economy right now does not, isn't able to fulfill domestically. The second is the self-sufficient. So the idea that like foreign companies with tax exemptions are likely also going to construct things like regional hubs for roads, with infrastructure and factories specifically. These are things that foreign companies are able to exclusively bring into Kenya on a much larger scale for the handle. That is the main impact that we did credit. I think that was also able to explain why it translates to greater amounts of income to Kenyan government, even less tax and government revenue. It also boosts up the GDP and production capacity for Kenya specifically. That was an impact I think was less intended by the opposition to the ground. The second unique impact that we credit was on the idea of likely the temporariness of these industries that Bob brought up. So Bob's main concern is the idea that like, even if it's true that these companies stay for 10 to 15 years, it's unlikely that they're going to stay for the long term because they are probably going to move overseas for better tax rates. I think this is a valid concern because it then means that there's a long-term gap in Kenya's development, which is also something that's potentially bad and harmful. The way in which Trump approached this is a response that we got from Philip, which is the idea that like with some costs and with the establishment of industries for 10 to 15 years, it makes it economically unattractive for industries to move elsewhere, even if they're cheaper tax rates, insofar as there are other considerations that are taken into account by these companies independent of the tax rate. I think that's a fair concern. I think that had to respond to what opposition also gave in second, which is the example of small companies and textile manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies moving away overseas, which means there's an empirical truth that SEZs are a bit more temporary, but there are also incentives for foreign companies to also want to stay as much as they can. What this acts is that there's probably significant mitigation to the risk of SEZs being temporary in the future, but the risk still exists. The question therefore is how does opposition hedge against the risk of companies moving away in the long term and creating that long-term development gap that is a harm that Bob was winning debate on. I think that for the second discussion in terms of labor comes really importantly. I think there are two types of labor that we're talking about around. The first is in terms of unskilled labor, the second is in terms of more skilled and educated labor. The first thing when it comes to unskilled labor, I think opposition was able to explain that right now the informal economy is the one that largely employs most individuals who are unskilled. So they work in things like menial labor, they work in things like construction, etc. The difference is that they're probably going to now be hired by the formal economy when it comes to SEZs. Ops' main concern is that the creation of these SEZs also means that there's lax labor regulations, which Prop concedes. The harm, therefore, that Bob wants to contend is the idea that like, probably also in quite bad working conditions specifically. But I do think that Prop is able to preempt this by explaining that the comparison to the informal economy is so significantly better for them to be employed in the formal sector, either through number one, stable income, or secondly, the ability for them to be protected in the first place, rather than an industry that is less regulated. So the contention that the panel was able to buy was that like maybe there's less regulation to workers' protection, but it's compared against very little regulation at all, but also at the same time an unstable economy that these individuals are not able to plan their economic future on. So we are able to credit that the unskilled labor parts of Kenya are probably able to benefit as a result of SEZs. The second part is in terms of skilled labor. There is a little bit of contention here. Ops' concern is that right now, Kenya has a very educated population. The problem is that they are likely to be underutilized by MNCs and foreign companies because there's a preference for foreign companies to import their own labor in to also maximize the amount of profit that they're able to cycle their way back overseas. That's a perfectly fair concern. Prop's contention to this is the idea that like, if we hire domestic workers, it is probably cheaper and therefore more economically efficient. That is a counter reason to explain why there's a potential for domestic labor to also be hired if they are skilled specifically. The panel was a bit deadlocked when it comes to like how we view both of these contentions, because it's equally true that foreign companies want to maximize profits overseas and then hire like foreigners. Also at the same time, it is cheaper to hire domestic Kenyan workers and therefore Kenyan workers can be hired at the end of the day. So there is a less significant difference when it comes to how the skilled labor of Kenya probably is employed. Likely this will be employed in skilled sectors even without SEZs, which means that the benefit that skilled labor receives is probably a bit marginal. But what was unique that skilled labor now receives on their side of the house was what was contingent on the first issue, which is technical expertise and transferable skills that were provided to the skilled labor in Kenya specifically. So maybe it is not to a huge scale that a lot of individuals are now employed in the industry and therefore are extremely skilled, but there's a significant portion of the population that's able to receive transferable skills. And even if it's true that like companies will move away in the next 10 to 15 years, these are skills that stay for decades and therefore also translate into global entrepreneurship, also at the same time fund the global manufacturing basis that the opposition tries to win on. So the way in which Trump approached the second issue is that even if it's true that like there's potential for capital flight in the next decade, the Kenyans are able to hedge this with transferable skills they receive in the process of SEZs through things like skills and infrastructure, and therefore also come prior to opposition's benefit of developing the domestic economy. So So, to conclude this okay, Trump was able to explain why SECs are unique in attracting foreign investment and foreign investment is good, and also at the same time able to hedge against the large investment opportunity of capital fight in the future by creating transferable skills and infrastructure that is able to sustain Kenya's economy in the long term. That concludes the OA. Any questions from the teams? Yes, so every member of the panel is here, and you should reach out to personal feedback as well. We wish you all the best for your future rounds. If you have no questions, you can enter personal feedback right now, and all of us in the next rounds. Okay, unfortunately, we can't do feedback right now, but if you would like to catch the judges over lunch, I'm sure everyone is happy. You can reach out to me as well. Happy to give feedback to you guys about all the best. And yeah, congratulations, congratulations. Good luck for your next rounds.
We have a computer.
Yeah, we can. Thank you. There's no problem.